Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, Simon, in Adelaide, in Australia. We've got my colleague, I'm Justin Blake. I have my colleague, Simon Bartold, with me today. Hi, Simon. Simon is a performance footwear consultant, researcher, and educator, and has the great biomechanical website and resource, Bartold Clinical Biomechanics. So, Simon, how's things?
Good morning, everybody. Hi, Justin. Yeah, things are great down here in Oz. We're pretty much operating on normal down here. So I do feel your pain for everybody in UK and Ireland that things are still not so good, but they will improve. They will. Everybody go out and make sure you get your vaccination, and soon, if you do that, then it means we can all have a beer together sooner rather than later, which should suit me just fine.
Sooner rather than later. Yeah, so we just touched on your air miles have crashed over the last year. Then, I mean, but you have been constantly in and out of airports.
Yeah, I think 2012 was my record year where I spent 9 months away from home, and a fair bit of that time was actually circling the globe in aircraft. And I can tell you, it is. For anybody who thinks that sounds glamorous, it's highly, highly overrated. And I sometimes think if I never had to set foot inside an aircraft again, I'd be pretty happy. I'm waiting for a teleporter, Justin. That's what I'm hanging out for, so I can just press the button and be where I need to go.
Yeah, teleportation's the next big thing. So I think a lot of things have sort of changed over the last sort of year then with COVID stuff. So you were just saying there's quite a lot more focus on the Bartold Clinical side.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everybody I think was in the same boat. I mean, we were talking about the athletic footwear industry, which obviously I'm pretty embedded in, and it was a terrible industry. As I said, I think the only industry you could be in that would be any worse would be to be a publican. But it was very hard because when China shut down, of course, there was no manufacturing, and when they opened up again, all of retail had shut down. So it had a huge impact on the whole industry, and even the big companies. I mean, I'm talking even the big boys like Adidas and Nike. They were on very high double-digit negative growth. So we're talking, dropping a quarter of their income in a quarter, in a financial quarter. So it had a huge effect on a lot of different things. But what it didn't have an impact on, or it had the reverse, is people chasing CPD and really trying to get up to speed with what they were doing. So for us at Bartold Clinical, it was an interesting time, because we saw this very big demand for people really wanting to improve their online educational status and get up to date with their CPD. So yeah, it was quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, there was a huge amount here and in the UK of online CPD evenings, and just Sean Savage on from Belfast, and Sean was was very busy with a lot of speakers, and that sort of continued on. And I think, of course, as you say, yeah, it's a lot of what happens at conferences and behind the sort of scenes, which is what really it's the sort of the good thing about that sort of community, the face to face.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we're all kind of missing that, because we've all, those of us that have been around long enough have made a lot of mates all over the world, and I really miss that, and I miss the meeting new people and the networking side of things. I always think that's almost as important as the academic content at conferences. And I am really starting to miss that. But I'm pretty sure we're coming out the other side of the tunnel, and it's great seeing guys like Sean and Emily in Ireland, who are putting together the fantastic CPD over there. So keeping a close eye on what they're doing, and they seem to be going from strength to strength, which is really great.
Yeah, that's been fantastic. And so podiatry's been giving you sort of quite a good career in terms of being able to travel the world. Was that the sort of the plan from the outset?
Had you told me when I graduated all those years ago that podiatry would take me to 42 countries, 4 Olympic Games, 2 World Track and Field Championships, I would have said you're mad, but that's exactly what it's done. So it's been quite a journey, and it's been a real privilege, actually. And I think it's it's just interesting that how you develop yourself as a practitioner. The sky's the limit, really. So I guess I'm living proof that there are things that you can do that are quite outside your expectations when you graduate.
And was your for the first foray into sports medicine with the AFL?
No, it's interesting. So I was a mature age student. So when I say mature age, I was about 4 or 5 years older than the other guys. So I was the old bastard in the in the classroom. But so I'd already done another degree. I'd already done a bachelor's degree in physiology and zoology. So that was actually stood me in pretty good stead, because I think my party days were not exactly over. Well, not by a long shot, really, but but I kind of knew how to study, and I knew how to balance that. I knew how to balance that with trips to the uni bar and the uni bistro, where I spent quite a bit of time. So it made life a bit easier, because I really was able to sort of focus on what I wanted to do, and I sort of also had an idea of a career path of where I wanted to go, and I knew that I wanted to do sports medicine. I mean, that was my real passion. And I was pretty lucky, because I had a mentor, a guy in Adelaide by the name of Bill Kutcher, who probably was in Australia one of only 3 or 4 guys who really was very embedded in podiatric sports medicine. He was doing quite a bit, and he was an old footballer himself. He was a professional footballer. So he actually employed me when I graduated, and I worked for him for about 18 months. And then I had an opportunity to go and join a multidisciplinary sports medicine clinic called Adelaide Sports Sciences Clinic. And that's really where it sort of all came together, because I was now in this situation. And I think it was unique. I think I was the only podiatrist in the country who was doing or had done anything like that. But there I was, working with physios and orthopedic surgeons and dietitians and sports psychologists, and we were very very much focused on us being a proper group that worked together. So apart from maybe the orthopedic surgeons in the early days, they weren't that friendly towards me, but eventually they came around. But everybody else, we did work as a team, and I was given a lot of opportunity in terms of working with AFL teams, and I've worked a lot with cricket, and it all kind of went from there, basically, Justin. So I think I was probably in the right time at the right place, and a lot of dominoes fell in my direction, basically.
Yeah, I mean, when you have that sort of team with those different sort of people sort of feeding into it, it definitely does sort of expand the way you sort of think about things, because I think the training can be so much sort of foot focused and a lot less medicine. And that was one of your recent sort of posts, was a little bit like a little bit that we need to put a little bit more medicine into sports medicine.
Yeah, we do. And I think podiatrists need to figure out how they get that. I mean, I worked for many years with the elite basketball team in Adelaide, so the Adelaide 36ers, who are the Adelaide team in the NBL. And at one point in time, so I was touring with them all over the country, so I went to every game. And at one point in time, I was the only medical person attached to the team touring. They had no doctor and they had no physio. And so I was actually dealing with things like, I remember very well one game, a guy called Daryl Pearce, who was one of our great players, broke his jaw on the field. It was a bit unusual for a podiatrist to be treating a broken jaw or treating a concussion, but I had to learn aspects of medicine that you would never be exposed to as a podiatrist. And that didn't make me a doctor, didn't make me a sports physician. I was still a podiatrist, but by hell, it really rounded out my education in terms of sports medicine. I had to learn about drugs in sport and all those sorts of things in elite sport. So I think, for me now, I wrote that article only a couple of days ago, and for people who haven't seen it, look, I'll give Bartold Clinical a plug, because my business partner Paul Griffin would be disgusted with me if I didn't. But you can get on there, www.bartoldclinical.com, and have a look at it. But I wrote it about vitamin B deficiency, and it seemed to me like it was a good thing to write about, because it's actually quite common, and there's so much more to it than meets the eye. And the gist of the article was about a paper that was just released only a few days ago, where they were able to make an association between vitamin B12 deficiency and rotator cuff tear. So they were looking at this definite relationship between the deficiency in vitamin B12 and tendinopathy, or if if there's a connection with connective tissue disorders. So I wrote that article because I reckon what happens with us is we get in our comfort zone. We might be seeing 20 or 30 cases of plantar heel pain per day. We get into our little tunnel vision, and that's when you miss the red flags. And that's why, for me, and I said this to you when we were chatting before, for me, if people ask me, what does it take to become a good or a great clinician, I'd say you have to learn the art of taking a history, and you have to not get sucked into routines, because if you do, you will miss important things. So if you've got an older athlete who comes in with Achilles tendinopathy and they're vegan, or they've had some sort of operation of their stomach which reduces acid production, they will not be able to absorb vitamin B12 to the same extent as anybody else in the population. So you have to ask those questions, and then if you think there's a connection, you have to send them off for a blood test. Otherwise, you won't treat them properly, and you'll basically be chasing your tail for a long, long time and doing them a disservice. They won't get better, basically, is the outcome. So I do, as you can tell, I'm getting all passionate about this because I'm very passionate about this topic, and I think it's so important for podiatrists. We have to be better than everybody else, and I think it's super important that we learn this art and skill of history taking, interpretation of that history, investigation, and then making the diagnosis, the proper diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but of course that also comes just with more exposure to different patients and with different problems, and of course then it takes time to sort of build up that sort of mental sort of picture that you.
Well, it does, but I think the trap you fall into, mate, is, let's take plantar heel pain. So if you've got a practice and you've just been out and bought yourself a nice new shiny extracorporeal shockwave therapy unit, and I think they're great and I think they're effective.
Yeah.
Or if you've built your whole practice around orthotic therapy, and every single person you see with plantar heel pain, you automatically think, I'm going to give them shockwave therapy, or I'm going to put them in orthotic. My point is, there's going to come a time where some of those patients are going to fall through the cracks for sure, because you haven't actually, you've fallen into the trap of just becoming routine in your history taking, your investigation, your examination, and your diagnostic processes. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, terribly important that people think about that. I mean, I don't want to be too preachy, but I do think it's quite important, because everybody's fallen into that trap, me included, where we just think, yeah, I know what it is, it's too easy, we'll treat it this way, and that's when you get in trouble.
It's walking and quacking like a duck, it's a duck. And off we go with our intervention. And do you think a lot of times sort of clinical practice then is being pushed on, and then the research is then just lagging behind, or is it vice versa, or a bit of both?
Well, I mean, we're super lucky here in Australia, because we really have preeminent researchers in sports medicine. So we've got absolute experts in tendinopathy. We've got absolute experts in knee pain. We've got a lot of people who have really pushed the barrow in terms of saying it's time we stopped scoping every knee, that we need to be thinking more about that. So I actually think the level of research here in sports medicine and podiatry is exceptional. We've got great researchers in podiatry here. We've got Hilton Menz, we've got Dan Bonanno, we've got Shannon Montaneau, we've got lots of different people here, and also in the UK, you have really good researchers too. So I'm not sure.
You're speaking at the Staffordshire conference in a couple of weeks.
I am, yeah.
Again, and I mean it was great. I went through the program there in the mid 2000s, and I mean it was one of the initial sort of podiatric biomechanics master's program, and so Nachi's still fighting the good fight.
Well, Nachi's awesome. I mean, he's a very passionate bloke, and and I think what he's created there, and he's got a great team around him with Aoife, and so he's got some quality people there, and I think I really admire what Nachi's built out of essentially nothing. I mean, he created it, so I think that's good. So yeah, getting back to the research question, look, there's no doubt there's crappy research out there, and there's no doubt that some of the stuff is not perhaps what we'd like it to be. But I think a lot of that is probably, for me, Justin, the big gaps in clinical sports medicine. So I don't generally like the way clinical sports medicine research is done, because it's often coming out of the world of orthopedics, and I'm not wanting to point my finger at those guys, but basically I don't like research where it's outcome research and the outcome is either excellent, good, or fair, and that's what we often see. It doesn't mean anything.
This implant, we did 2,000 of these, and this is the outcome.
Yeah. That research is that's just that really is just opinion as far as I'm concerned. So I think that's generally done poorly, and that's the real gap. I think that, and the opportunity as well. I think that there is the opportunity for clinicians to start gathering data, and maybe to put together some simple little studies that actually help other clinicians on a Monday morning. That they could actually be giving us some decent real world data, because sometimes research, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, are we all interested in the lactate levels in a chicken leg after exercise? Well, perhaps not. So I think, I mean, personally, I am. So I read this stuff all day long. But would it change the way I practice on a Monday morning? It wouldn't.
Well, that's it. In any conference or anything you want to go to, you that was it. You wanted to have something on Monday morning to go and start to do differently. And then, of course, sometimes a little bit like that. Once you saw one thing, it just opened up a whole area that you hadn't even considered before.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And so then with because biomechanics research and footwear has obviously been a huge part of your what you've worked on, and that's brought you to sort of Europe, and I used to look jealously at your pictures when you were living in Annecy. It's a beautiful part of the world in France there. I've spent we went over for sort of Tour de France through there, and it's a fantastic part of the world. But sports footwear in particular, I mean, with as you say, with the bigger companies, is there not so much sort of pressure on them to sort of releasing? I mean, it used to seem to be that every other. Do they work on a quarterly or for new sort of products? And
generally, they work on a bi-yearly calendar. So they generally have what they call SS, which is spring summer, and then they have AW, which is autumn winter. So basically, it's back to school is what they're looking at. So normally two catalogs per year. But a lot of that is often just a color update. So it's just new colorway, might have a few tweaks to the upper, but not new models. New models generally will come out. It takes about 18 months to go from concept to slat wall. So generally, new models about you generally factor in about 2 years for a new model. So it's probably a lot more complex than most people realize to take it from an idea to the creation of a product. It's quite time consuming and involves a lot. But most companies would work on that sort of time frame. When we built a hockey shoe for Osaka, we took it from concept to production in a bit over 12 months, and that with what we thought was pretty good product. So, and that's extraordinarily fast. Mm-hmm. So, and that was because it was interesting exercise. That's because they're a small company and they're quite nimble. But when you're working with large companies like Salomon or Asics, there are a lot of moving parts within the company, and especially a French company like Salomon, there are a hell of a lot of cooks and a hell of a lot of chefs in the kitchen, I can tell you. So
good lunches.
Oh, the lunches are awesome. Yeah, I went with
one one stage, and the lunches were great. And I mean those guys. I mean, that's where most of the
I tell you, I just it was unbelievable when I first got there, you know, from Australia, and you know, you get to work about 8:30 in the morning, and then there's about a solid 45 minutes of kissing and conversation, a lot of kissing, men and women, and then you know a lot of coffee drinking, and then finally, you know, you settle down by about 9:30, and then about 11 o'clock. The corks would come out, the cheese will come out, the charcuterie plate will be there. Everybody's tucking into whatever's going on there. Then you'll do another hour or so, and then you'll have lunch. And I'm not saying the French don't work hard, because they do, but it's just their life-work balance. I mean, they've got it nailed, man. It's just they're really into it. It's very funny.
Yeah, they have it organized, and to have it organized well. But no, but it did seem at the time, maybe things have changed now, maybe sort of 10, 15 years ago, or when I was in London in the mid 2000s, and we had a couple of good running shops then, and one Run and Become, and they were the sort of trailblazers of turn up, and the guys would, you know, run you up and down the alleyway, and that was where everybody spent their sort of podiatrist sent people to. And but they sort of seem to be just churning. It's a lot of the companies seem to be just churning out. There was a different flex line here, or a different amount of air pillow cushioning underneath the forefoot, and it was all just seemed like bullshit at times.
I think the industry is rife with that. Unfortunately, I mean, the industry would like you to believe that there's a pyramid, and right at the top of the pyramid is biomechanics, but right at the top of the pyramid is marketing, and biomechanics is like a little excrescence somewhere down here.
Yeah.
So I think that yeah, most companies they are quite often overruled by marketing. So I mean, I've had experiences where we've had concepts that we've taken to advanced prototype, and then we've researched them and we know they work, but we've had them pulled because they didn't fit in with a marketing plan.
Yeah.
So that's just a fact of life in the industry, and you know, it's something you have to live with, basically. And it's not, I wouldn't point the finger at any one company, because I know that all companies do that.
Yeah.
But we're seeing, we're definitely in a nice little innovation period now, Justin. You know, I think it's been very interesting for me since the 4% Nike Vaporfly 4% came out, and we've now got this incredible technological arms race, as it's been called. I mean, it's very interesting for a shoe guy like me to see that going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially then to actually be able to sort of see that. I mean, it's, well, of course, it's with the sole. We'll lay it on people if they're not too sure what what Nike have done. I mean, it's a carbon flexing sole, which is increased stiffness, but is actually able to. I mean, it's increased oxygen sort of capacity, hasn't it?
Yeah, so we'll talk about the 4%, because the 4% was the first shoe. It was the revolutionary shoe, and it basically appeared in 2017 in the USA for the US Olympic marathon trials.
Mm-hmm.
No, sorry, that's not correct. It appeared in 2016 for the Rio trials. So, and then it was subsequently worn in Rio. But basically, what it is it's a fairly revolutionary shoe with three main things. So it has different geometry. Most notably, it has a very high rocker.
Mm-hmm.
It has a carbon fiber plate, and it has a unusually high stack height of an unusually compliant high rebound foam. So all of those three things combined, and what the net result of that is about a 4% increase in efficiency measured by oxygen uptake, which equates to about a 2% performance improvement. In other words, for those people that can utilize it, and not everybody can exploit these shoes, some people can't, but for those people that can, they're going to run about 2% faster. And when you're talking about an elite in a marathon, that is an astronomical advantage. It's a huge advantage.
Yeah. And I mean, the research that's going into I mean, it's the sole sort of construction, and we're at the stage now where we're able to actually put different types of different materials in the same sole.
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of stuff going on. I mean, I got a new shoe today. Have a look at this. So this is not a super shoe. So this is not a carbon fiber plated shoe, but this is a shoe made by Nike. It's called the Infinity, and it's brand new, or Infinity Run KT is its correct name. But have a look at the setup of the rear foot on this. Where are we? There. Yeah. Look at that. Okay. So look at the difference in the lever arm. So that's where your heel's sitting. And this foam is unbelievably compliant. I mean, it's as squishy as. It's very, very, very soft. So they're saying like this is an everyday running shoe for runners who it's not an expert running shoe by any means. But they're talking now, for the very first time, they're talking about footwear being actually able to reduce the incidence of running-related injury. I mean, that's like literally like the holy grail. Nobody's ever had the nerve to actually make that claim before, but those sorts of claims are being made. So we've got on one hand a claim that shoes will reduce injury, and on the other hand we've got a claim that shoes will make you run faster. So we're in a kind of a brave new world here in terms of athletic footwear. It's a very, very unusual time to be involved in the industry.
And the future, because I think I've probably misquoted you a couple of times before, is well, of course, the shoes are, as you say, the athlete has to be able to use the shoe.
Yep.
So first of all, and how does that going to then translate over then into sort of mass, well, the footwear? But also, I mean, is it going to be the stage in a couple of years' time where shoes are going to be more person specific, then sort of designed in store and printed, and or is that?
There's another whole hour, Justin. But it's a really good question, and a very intuitive question, because as we have it now, if you understand a shoe, so we got a shoe like this, right?
Yeah.
So basically, if this were a super shoe, if this were a carbon plated shoe, essentially you're going to have a point where you're going to hit the ground, right? That's variable for all runners. All runners are going to hit slightly differently, and then you have to assume that this foam is going to compress and it's going to rebound. But that's going to be different for all runners as well, because runners are different weights and different sexes and different biomechanics. So that's going to be different. And then you have to assume that the carbon fiber plate is going to flex at a certain point. So for the shoe to work properly, all of those things have to align for that specific athlete.
Yeah.
So for some it will partially align and they'll get a benefit from that, and that's great. For some, it won't align at all, and they won't get any benefit from the shoe at all. And we call these the non-responders. So the bottom line here is that I believe we're fairly rapidly coming down a path, especially with our manufacturing capabilities and 3D printing and the ability to use multi-viscosity midsoles in PU and stuff like that. We're very rapidly coming down a path where the shoe will be mass-produced bespoke. So total contradiction of terms, total oxymoron, but that's what will happen. So you will be able to, in your clinic, you will be able to gather your biometric data, take your foot scan, you'll be able to upload that information, and they will be able to, in very short order and probably quite cheaply, build that shoe for you. And that has really interesting repercussions, something I'm interested in with my work with netball, because with netball, a wing attack is actually playing a completely different game to a goalkeeper. They're not playing the same sport. The biomechanics are completely different. The actions are completely different. It's the same in Australian football. The forwards are playing a completely different game to the on-ballers. The on-ballers run a half marathon a game. The forwards jump up and down on the spot and catch the ball, basically. But the footwear is the same. Yeah. It's exactly the same. So we're now in a world where, for netball, for example, we will quite easily be able to build footwear that's not only for the athlete, but it's also for the position they play within a sport. So this is where it starts to get real interesting and quite exciting in terms of where we're going with this.
And will the footwear companies are going more towards like the orthotics companies are going to do with a library system of sort of soles that will match to different patients?
I think what they'll do is that not so much soles. I think they'll have a library of lasts. So at the moment, at the moment, take a company like ASICS, who I'm very familiar with, obviously, with all of their marquee running products. So what they call the big five, so the Kano, the Nimbus, those sorts of shoes, they're all built off one last. It's got a name. It's called EOR 16. It's no secret. So all of those shoes are built off the same last. I think what will happen, especially with the advent of 3D printing, where I can go to uni tomorrow and I can 3D print a last of my foot, no problems whatsoever. So I think what they'll do is they'll have, rather than have one last, they'll probably have a library of 100 lasts or maybe 1,000 lasts, and you'll be able to talk to the company and match it to your patient. Say, I think last 47 is what is the last for this particular patient, and they will then build the shoe from that last. And it even calls into question, Justin, whoever said that shoes should be a mirror image. Why should your left shoe be the same as your right shoe? Because not many people have mirror image feet. So we have the opportunity now to really start to look at things like comfort and fit.
I have spoken to orthotics labs before, and they do tell you that sometimes they will make an orthotic nearly match the other one, because sometimes people get it out of the box and it's different. Get a bit confused.
Well, some of the best results I've had with orthotic therapy, mate, are people who had their orthotic switched over, so they're wearing the left one and the right shoe. They say these things.
Well, it works for the patient, but that's back to. I can't remember what the shoes were, but just back to what we talked about in terms of the marketing and patients and different things. We had the triathletes are always the good ones. They're always like really crunching the numbers and I mean, when you actually sort of sat in front of this guy and explained that compression, I can't remember what the shoes were. We're going to give the kinetic return ones.
Yeah.
You're talking about you're 17 stone and there's no, is there kinetic return? It's bullshit.
Well, this is one of the great arguments about zero drop and minimalism and the discussion about drop at all. I mean, of course, the drop for somebody who weighs 13 stone is not the same as the drop for somebody who weighs 8 stone. It's completely different. And what's more, the drop for somebody who's a size 13 is not the same as the drop for somebody who's a size 8, because it doesn't scale. So, that's where the whole argument nearly drove me mad, because people are just thinking, oh yeah, what's the drop on that? I've got to have it at X millimeters, and thinking, well, it's insane. I mean, even with manufacturing, there's a 4 to 6% error. So the fact is, you may get a brand new pair of shoes, and the left shoe maybe have a different drop to the right shoe out of the box, brand new. So,
and that was the thing. Well, is that where the advent of, you said, the holy grail now is increased performance and decreased injury, and that was the whole sort of. Was that the whole premise of the barefoot running? Was how come they're spending all this billions on research and technology on footwear, and the injury rates are still high?
Yeah, I think barefoot running was a true fad, and it was fueled by two events. One was Dan Liebman's article in Nature, and the other was Chris McDougall's book Born to Run. And I mean, those two things were both, they're both fabrications basically. And you talk to somebody like Ben O'Nig, and he'll just tell you this is a 24-year cycle, so you can expect to see it come up again soon. But it's we look at it, we talk about something called the hype cycle, which is a real thing. And the hype cycle is basically where you have a parabolic curve. So you have a suggestion, and it takes it up to a point of expectation. And if that expectation is not realized, well, then it rapidly falls back down. If there's something in it, then it will continue to slowly have a linear growth. So it's actually real. I think the whole barefoot minimalism thing was a classic example of that hype cycle, where it got to a certain point and every bug is getting injured. So he didn't realize the expectations. They were saying you won't get injured if you run this way, but the reverse was true. And so it very, very rapidly dropped away, and it's now it's non-existent basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, you do have to try to, as we said, there's a lot of bullshit goes on in the industry, and you do have to try and sort out the wheat from the chaff a bit and figure out what's real and what's sustainable and what's not.
Because, of course, the research that Nig did was, of course, there was that sort of fascinating, the vibration capacity of the body to absorb the forces and stuff. All that research. I mean, maybe you can rule this out. This is somewhere I maybe picked up at a bar in a conference. Did Nike at one stage make an air ice hockey shoe that supposedly gave to one of the professional teams and they couldn't skate on because they didn't have the proprioceptive feedback? Or I just make that up.
I don't know. I mean, I could talk to vibration ad nauseum, really, because it was one of the main things I was looking at when I was at Salomon for 4.5 years.
Okay.
And we had Benno on board as a consultant, so I spent a lot of time talking about it with Benno. I'm not aware of that Nike shoe you're talking about. I do know that Martin Shorten, who's a biomechanist in Portland, Oregon, who worked for many years for Nike, he worked a lot with the Navy SEALs, and the Navy SEALs have these, they call them VFBs, very fast boats, and they're able to go from Florida across to Cuba in a very short period of time. Nobody knows exactly how fast they go, but they go very fast, probably somewhere in the vicinity of 100 miles an hour. So, and they're an open boat. So these guys are going across the Gulf of Mexico in these boats that go very quick, and they're getting the bejesus shaken out of them, basically. So he did develop a specific type of webbing or matting that went on the floor of the boat to reduce the vibration, because because vibration exhausts you, it makes you very fatigued. So they were finding they were getting from point A to point B, and they could barely raise a trot because they were so tired by the time they got there. So there is a lot in this whole concept of vibration, and it may well be that this is a big part of what we saw with Eliud Kipchoge when he went under 2 hours for the marathon distance in Vienna. That it may well be that Nike unwittingly kind of cracked the vibration and fatigue nut with the Alphafly. I personally think that's quite feasible. That's what's happened, because one of the ways you attenuate vibration, of course, is by contracting muscles. So if the shoe is attenuating the vibration, you don't have to contract the muscles much, which means you don't get as fatigued. And all you have to do is look at Kipchoge go over the finish line in 1:59.40, and he looks like he could turn around and do it all again. He does not look fatigued. So,
but that shoe would have been specifically tuned for him.
100%. Yeah. It was, yeah. As nearly anybody who's breaking a world record or has an outstanding performance, despite what we've been told by WA, by World Athletics, those shoes are prototypes.
Yeah, they're not going to. And I mean, it's the body's capacity to the heat exchange is really is a part of that, and that's obviously where improved oxygen consumption comes in to get under the 2 hours. I mean, those guys are burning up so. I mean, they're.
Yeah, look, I think obviously the Ineos challenge is not. I mean, I loved it, but it's not something we should focus on too much because it was completely contrived. So everything about that was engineered and orchestrated for him to go under 2 hours. So every nuance. I mean, I've read a lot about this. I mean, they had every bump on that 26K course, 26-mile course, sorry, 42K course. They had literally every bump. I'd need to reread it, but I think it was anything over 2 millimeters they had mapped on the entire course. That's the sort of detail they went to. So they knew everything about his nutrition. They chose Vienna specifically because of the time zone differences between Kenya and Austria. All of his hydration, his sleep patterns, every single nuance of it, and then of course he had paces and he had laser guidances. So
those are great.
we can applaud it as a really interesting exercise, and we know the shoe had probably a fairly significant part in that time. But we can't really parlay it to the real world because it was so contrived.
Yeah, but I suppose like any of this, it's that research then which has to sort of trickle down into the second bin in the local sports shop in a few years' time. I mean, is that going to be the as you say,
the biggest concern we've got? I have a sneaking suspicion that one of the reasons that we've seen no real dent in running related injury rates over the last 40 years is maybe because of the way it's handled at retail. So I have a sneaking suspicion that, I mean, we're still dealing, I mean, I'm dealing with this in Australia. I know this is the case in some retail in the UK, and it certainly would be in Ireland as well. But, you know, we're still dealing with people who are putting people on a treadmill. They're taking a little bit of video of them from behind only, and they're saying, oh, geez, you know, you're terrible pronator. We've got to put you in this shoe, blah, 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 blah. It's got to be motion control. The shoe's going to weigh 350 grams. It's as rigid as a damn brick. It's got horrible proprioceptive feedback, yada, yada, yada. And those, that's very bad advice. So basically somebody's gone into this, and this is happening in podiatry as well. I mean, I was in the USA only a few years ago, and one running shoe store employed this guy to go around the local district to the podiatrists, and that particular running shoe store sold 240 pairs of Brooks Beast per month. It's all they sold, basically.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's...
Yeah, you want a motion control shoe, stick them in a Brooks.
Yeah, yeah. We're locked into this situation where people still are buying into this controlled pronation paradigm, and in running in particular, it just doesn't work. Sorry about the noise in the background. The kids are about to jump into the bath, so it's probably going to get noisy. But yeah, so that's one of the problems we have. And I suspect what's happening here is that people are going in, they're seeing their pod or they're seeing their retail partner, and they're being flogged a shoe that in the back of their mind they're thinking, geez, I'm not sure that felt that comfortable, and I'm not sure I really like the way it felt, but this guy's told me that it's what I've got to have, and I'm going to spend 160 pounds, so I guess that's what I'll buy. And they go out and that shoe doesn't suit them and they get injured. So I suspect that that's a part of it, I reckon.
Well, also it was sort of belt and braces. When if you were having your orthotic in it, you needed a good stable base for it to be on. So you'd stuck it into that. So you had the double whammy of the shoe plus then the orthotic as well. Yeah. And well, that was it, because I never thought that shoes changed mechanics. And is it kinematics now? Is it? I mean, and so is that why? Well, that was why then. I mean, rehabilitation or sort of. I mean, is it all down to sort of strength? I mean,
well, I think the general consensus is that shoes probably don't make massive kinematic changes, but they certainly affect kinetics to a larger degree, and you know that's pretty easy to demonstrate. We can easily put an accelerometer on somebody and we can show changes. It's not so much about. I think what we've been focused on, the problem, Justin, we've been focused on these two great paradigms. One is that a shoe has to cushion you, because if you don't get cushion from ground impact, you're going to get injured. That's not true. And the second is that you've got to stop the foot from pronating, because if you pronate, you're going to get injured. That's not true. So the two paradigms that have driven running shoe research for the past 40 years, and to some extent continue to, are not true. That there's no evidence for them at all. So that's really the car park we've backed into, I think, and it's a bit of an issue, and it's incredibly difficult to change the mindset of the people who are referring the shoes to retail, and then it's very difficult for retail to change their mind as well. And quite often I feel a bit sorry for retail, because you know they're on a bit of a hiding to nothing when they get a recommendation from a podiatrist or a physio for a certain shoe. It's quite difficult to countermand that recommendation, isn't it? You know, that's not good business to do that. So there's a lot of wheels within the wheels here that are creating a bit of an unhealthy environment, I think.
No, that was, I mean, working as part of a larger team with physical therapists and sports medicine doctors, which I did in London, it was all more, that opened more to sort of the rehabilitation and things, and you know, core and all those sort of trans-ab stuff that was sort of fun around the core stability and type of doctor stuff, and strengthening. I mean, we're doing that in the mid 2000s or the late 90s, and so the shoe was only a part of the whole sort of program, where I think a lot of podiatrists sort of seem to be just like, here's the orthotic, here's the shoe, you're good to go, and not looking sort of anywhere sort of externally. And but back to sort of injuries, and we talked before about that envelope performance. So you get two athletes, you know, sprinting down the finish straight. One's mechanically a complete basket case, one's mechanically perfect. Yeah, that guy, the one with the crap biomechanics beats that one. How does that work? So it's that envelope.
Yeah. I personally find that whole concept really interesting, and I think it is the concept of the envelope of function. So this is the whole question of pronation, and the notion that we could possibly define overpronation, because what's overpronation for you is not for me, because my envelope to be able to deal with overpronation may well be much greater than yours. So, and that's why you do see this dichotomy between people who should be getting injured because of their crap biomechanics and the ones who shouldn't because they've got so-called perfect biomechanics, although we know that doesn't exist. And that is because there are so many variables within the human organism. I mean, there are so many things that would contribute to this, and footwear is just it's just a part of the equation. And it's interesting, it gets back to your question about, well, where are we going? Is it all about rehab, etc.? And I don't know what it's like in Ireland and the UK now, but there's a big push here now in Australia for really big focus on just rehab. Exercise is key. And look, I totally believe in that, but I also don't believe that it's the only answer. It's a bit like gait retraining. Is gait retraining the answer to all evils? Of course it's not. It's like saying minimalist shoes are the answer to all evil. It doesn't work that way. We aren't built that way. Humans aren't built that way. So I think that for the clinicians who might be listening here, I think it's really important that we don't sort of get too frothy at the mouth and immediately engage in the new trends that come along. Just try to analyze them properly. Just try to figure out exactly where it might fit into your management of a patient, and see what else you need to do to help that patient. But I would caution against wholesale embracing of new trends as they come along.
Well, as you say, like as with footwear, these things come in. These things sort of come in cycles, don't they? But yeah, there is a certain, especially physiotherapy, to life's better when you're stronger. And manual hands-on therapy, that's only massaging egos, apparently.
That argument's got quite ugly, hasn't it, in physiotherapy, especially. I mean, I read a lot of the stuff that's coming out of the UK, and it's actually got quite nasty, really.
Like certain people are sort of, we know out of Meekins, it's sort of, people should be struck off if they are just providing tickling services.
Yeah. The danger with that is that in 5 years' time that may come back to bite those people on the bum, because things do tend to go in cycles, as we've talked about. And it's fine to explore new things, and we should be evidence-based, and we should be looking at the research. But the thing about research is it's fluid. It just doesn't stay put. So in 5 years' time, we may well have some gun papers saying, if you use joint mobilization, or you're doing cross fiber frictions, or whatever the hell you want to call it, it's really effective, and here's the data to prove it. So where are we going to be then? So it's the whole baby in bathwater thing, isn't it? And we've been through this with orthotic therapy, where I think it's been questioned and it's been examined, and people have said, oh, you shouldn't be doing it, and yada yada yada. But we now have more than compelling data to say it's a very effective treatment modality, so we shouldn't just be ignoring it.
But of course, the orthotics just aren't the realm of the podiatrist or the sports clinician. I mean, it's again, they're you can buy them in the chemist shop, buy them in the sport shop. I mean, there's some type of insole, some type of sort of cushioning, something to go inside a shoe. It's not just being sort of prescribed by a podiatrist or by a physical therapist. So the access to it.
Look, I don't have any real objection or even concerns about the availability of over-the-counter devices. I think they have their place, but it's a little bit like we were talking about with footwear, isn't it? I mean, what you can do with a custom orthotic device is you can customize it to change stress in a tissue, and that's all you really want to do. And it's a matter of, can I think about how I do want the orthotic to interact with that particular foot at the right time with the right pressure in the right direction. And that's really it in a nutshell. That's what you try and do with a custom built orthotic device. You can't do that with an over-the-counter device. You can provide comfort and you can provide cushioning and you can probably do a few other things, but to me that's the difference. And it's not a one's right or one's wrong. It's more about when you use it and where you use it.
And now some, of course, the technology's got to the stage where you can have an in practice 3D printing machine in the corner, and I mean those are interesting sort of changes now, aren't they?
Yeah, and I mean I've had a lot to do with a Belgian company, RS International, and they've really sort of pioneered a lot of work in this area, and so I've had an opportunity to have a look at these things, and I'm always, I think, healthily skeptical when I see these for the first time, but they're doing some unbelievable work, and I do think that this is the way it will go. So it's probably not, I don't know how it's going to affect orthotic laboratories, but I do think that the capability will be increasingly put in the hands of the practitioner. So we should really be able to do it ourselves.
I mean, some practices, of course, have been using CAD/CAM stuff for years, and it hasn't really. I don't think it's probably put much dent in the orthotic companies.
Yeah. I mean, I've flirted with a lot of different things, and I must admit, people might laugh at this, but I still like to get my hands dirty. I still love a cast. But that's just me. Maybe I'm really crap at doing scanning procedures. It's entirely likely, but I'm very confident in my ability to put on a decent cast. And I think where casting falls down is there are so many pitfalls with casting. So you have to be very fastidious about how you do it. I love putting on a cast. I always have.
Yeah, I always cast it. I mean, that whole sort of critique of a cast when it comes off and what you should be looking for. But and again, I think a lot of times it's as long as you're doing it reproducibly every time yourself, and whatever else data that you're sending off to the lab of how you're asking them to interpret that.
I think you got to be prepared to chuck it in the bin too if it doesn't meet your critique. And I'm not sure everybody's prepared to actually do that. But you have to be prepared to have a look at it, and if it doesn't meet what you were trying to capture, then you got to throw it up and do it again.
Yeah, and but I suppose that's the just with the technology now. Yeah, a lot cleaner, a lot less messy.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it was you must have met Darryl Phillips at one stage, did you?
Do you know what? I never have. I've never met him. I only met Howard Dannenberg quite recently, within the last 3 to 4 years, and we've sort of been on each other's radar for years and years and years, and knew of each other, but I've never met Darryl.
I mean, because Darryl had the Philips goniometer, which I have in one of the rooms, and it's quite a. I mean that was when we used to take so many measurements. God knows what the labs did with them. We were filling out pages and pages. And I mean, what do you think is really, or is it just because you're going to be asking a different specific design that I'll be asking for the same sort of patient? Is that it? What we've found that works over the years, or what are the key things that need to be?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I gave up taking too much notice of most measurements many years ago. So Kevin Kirby, who is a great mate of mine, and I often disagree, but I really like his approach to orthotic therapy, where it's far more focused on a joint moment and trying to apply a load so that you can shift or change the moment. Because if you can do that, then you can change tissue load, and that's not really so much dependent on measurements. I mean, and that's where his skive technique comes in. I mean, you don't have to measure anything. You basically make a choice of how big a cut you want to take, because all you're doing is inducing a supination moment.
Yeah.
So the measurements to a large degree go out the window. but there will be, for me, there would always be little subtleties about what you're trying to do with that particular custom device. But I don't think, I stopped doing relaxed and neutral calcaneal stance positions years and years ago. And for me, I've always thought the most important, and this is where it's weird, I never met Howard, because I've always thought the most important deficiencies biomechanically were in the sagittal plane. And I really haven't focused on frontal plane for a long, long time.
Yeah. Well, also back to you said the tolerances in the manufacture of the shoes can, what did you say, 4% difference? I mean, I'm sure there's that. I'm sure there's that in with orthotics as well. Especially when they brought out, I think I talked with Martin Vigo about this, when they had the direct milled orthotics. So basically, you did all this measurement and filled in your forms and sent it off to the lab, and they scanned and drilled and milled, and then they threw it into a tumbler with a whole load of pumice to pumice the edges off the grooves.
Well, I think this is what I like about. Is that my message or your message? No, it's me. I'll just see if I can get rid of that. Yeah. So this is what I like about the promise of 3D printing. That pretty much what you see is what you get. So I do like this concept of gathering data, whatever it may be, and biometric data, I think, is more important. Uploading it and then it just being applied. I think that's that to me makes more sense than to me that seems like a very positive step forward in terms of the way we look at all this.
Yeah, and well, of course, biometric data could be is topical at the moment. Face recognition and scanning and stuff, but of course then a lot of that applies to gait scanning and interpretation of movement as well.
Well, yeah, and I think you also have to factor in AI and machine learning, which is coming fast as well. So all of this will fold into, I think, orthotic therapy and definitely shoe manufacturing. I mean, AI and machine learning is already a big part of it. So we will learn case on case where we need to go with all of this, which is exciting and terrifying at the same time. I mean, it kind of is Rise of the Robots to a certain degree, which I'm not too sure about, but it's going to happen whether we like it or not.
Yeah, because and then the research, keeps pushing on. No, a lot of stuff that Nick did was but the neural component and everything then as well is a lot, obviously, where shock absorption and rebound and the shoe body interface comes from. And of course the surfaces can be used in shoes, and well, there's the court surface as well, but then there's the internal surface as well, and that proprioceptive. I mean, because our body came from that.
We were talking earlier about projects that got buried because they didn't kind of fit in with other people. So years ago with ASICs, just hang on one sec, please.
All right. The Rugrats.
You guys have to be quiet. I'm in the middle of something here. They can't be doing that.
Yeah, 2-year-old.
Go down the wall there a bit, or it's going to go horribly pear-shaped. But anyway, so what happened here is we actually built, this was with ASICs, and it was a fantastic project. It actually had a proper name. It was called the Gel Decibel, and it was a system where we built a shoe that had a series of dimples that pierced the midsole depending on weight and line of progression. So in other words, you can imagine if you're more pronated, then you're loading the medial column of the shoe more, the piercing will become more prominent, and so it stimulates the mechanoreceptors on your foot. Well, we did a lot of research on this at Melbourne Uni, and we got it to an advanced prototype stage. In fact, it was pre-production stage, and we knew it worked. So we knew that what it did was it would actually tell you that you were off the line of progression, wherever you wanted to be, and it would put you back on the right path. But interestingly, it had a refractory period. In other words, if you took the shoe away, that person continued to walk in that particular way, irrespective of whether they were wearing the shoe. So they learned from the shoe. So I presented this stuff in Turbing in 2012 or something like that, a little while ago. And I think this has got enormous potential, and I noticed that Nike have just very recently, in the last month or so, they've produced a patent that looks almost identical to what we did. Interestingly enough, they were in Tübingen. Nike were at this particular meeting, so it may well be they've sat on the idea because ASICS buried it. It never saw the light of day, which was one of the. Yeah, it was a real disappointment actually. I thought that project had such potential. And I understand why they did. They thought there might have been some sort of downside in terms of injury, and I can understand that. But the bottom line is it worked.
One of the very early orthotics was built on was with a little sort of nail that sort of stuck up onto the medial arch, and
Yeah.
we're quite aggressive with that.
Yeah, the ultimate pronation control. Get your shoe, turn it over, and hammer a nail through the first MPJ part of the shoe. They'll never pronate again.
Well, there has been. I mean, when I spoke with Bob Kidd, and he was saying back in Scotland when they were doing research with one of the shoe companies for distance running back in the 80s, the data that didn't suit, of course, the shoe company just took it all away. Yeah. I've heard of other colleagues. I don't know whether you've had this, where the sponsored shoe for the team is causing injuries. And of course, there was that whole range of all the Premiership football players getting broken fifth metatarsals with it. And I mean, I've heard of physio and sports med teams being exited and replaced.
Yeah. Well, Trevor Price got a lovely story about a rugby player he saw, and the bloke had, I think he'd fractured his fifth met twice, and he came in and Trevor did a bit of pressure testing with him and a PETA. Then he got his footy boot and he shaved off one of the lateral studs, sprigs, gave it back to the player and said, that'll be £100, thanks, on your way. And the bloke said, what do you mean? Trevor said, that was your problem. We just removed it because you've got a massive pressure spike right in the middle of the shaft, the fifth MT, and it's just having a cleaving effect on that MT, and it's taken it out, and it did solve his problem. But I mean, it's the whole proprioception thing is so interesting. A guy called Gordon Waddington did some fascinating research years ago, looking at inversion events. So all they did was build this very simple little insole. And it looked like the material that you find on the top of a table tennis bat, those little tiny dimples.
Yeah.
And they were able to show in a really elegant little study that just by putting that insole in the shoe, and they had a trapdoor which simulated an inversion event, they were able to show that putting that insole returned the proprioception to a barefoot level. So in other words, shoes made it a lot worse. You just whack that insole in and your proprioception was as good as if you were barefoot. So I don't think this area has been scratched really. I think there's a lot that we could be talking about in this area. I mean, maybe you should be putting table tennis bat material on top of your orthotic. Who knows? Yeah,
well, but that was always the thing about with shoes. I mean, it was sort of with neurally, because obviously it's the input that you're getting, the CNS. With shoes, it hit the ground and the message is there, but hit the ground, and then all of a sudden, we're sinking down. Now we've got to start decelerating, and now we've got to start, it's this. Yeah. And it's definitely all neural. Heidi Havoc in New Zealand with the chiropractic research about neural.
What's the name?
Heidi Havoc. I've been trying to get her on for a while.
No, not
a little bit. So I'm going to butcher the research. Put a goniometer on your elbow. This is 90 degrees. This is 180. Get people to sort of to tell you where they are in the goniometer. Adjust cervical spine, and then sort of see different sort of brain patterns, and they're better able to tell you where they are in the goniometer. I mean, it's more sort of neural, whole sort of neural sort of feedback, especially with injury as well, and that sort of inhibition of muscle sort of function and things. And
that very much folds into some of Benno and Anna Minderman's work on orthotic therapy, where they're saying, look, it's not about changing the angle of the dangle, it's about actually changing the signal to your brain, which will interpret that and change muscle activation patterns. And that's always made a lot of sense to me in terms of the way an orthotic could work. So those guys have certainly talked a lot about that.
Yeah. No, that was it. Well, I don't know, what were the French biomechanics? Because again, when I went to with CDAS in early about 2000, we went to the Sports Medicine Olympics place in Italy. I'm sure you've been, and they were putting insoles in with those sort of, you know, something under the cuboid, and then there'll be a cutout under the heel. And it was sort of like, how did you know what that guy wanted? You weren't measuring. It was just like, oh, well, this is what he needs. And I mean, they were doing fascinating stuff with, you know, putting in. We talked with Ramsey Sloss before in Glasgow. They were putting in bike guards and getting guys running around the sort of pitches and changing mechanics and looking at the different sort of bike patterns and stuff and things.
Yeah.
It was
for sure. All of that stuff's really interesting.
Yeah, and how that affects. So, and the future. Do you think? What's the future if there's so much more competition, as we say, for sort of sports medicine and with shoes and with off-the-shelf orthotics and 3D printing? And I don't know whether you saw that Kickstarter one a few years ago where you took an A4 page and put it against the wall and took a picture of your foot so it was standardized and sent it off to the States and got an insole back in the I mean, there's all these different things that are sort of coming in. And in some circles, a little bit of sort of worry of that, but that is sort of maybe missing out a little bit on this. Do you think that? Or no, I don't think that is.
No, I don't think missing it. I think there will be an evolution, and it's going to be. I don't think anybody should be afraid. I think there's stuff that the smart people will embrace, and they'll win, because it's not something we're going to be able to change. So. In sports shoes, I'm very convinced that we're only a very fairly short period away from where the shoe will become the orthotic, because you will be able to embed a 3D printed matrix that will be able to achieve what we can achieve now with orthotic device, and that will be able to be embedded in a multiple viscosity PU midsole, so the shoe will become the orthotic. Does that mean the death of orthotic therapy? Not at all. It just means you've got to look at it a different way. So you'll still be doing the prescribing. You'll just be doing it a different way. And there'll obviously be other areas where traditional orthotic therapy will be very important. You know, and I'm sure people now are thinking, well, hell, what happens if you get the 3D matrix wrong and you've embedded it in the shoe and it all goes pear-shaped? And that's a very valid question, I think. But the systems are going to be so good that I think there'll be the checks and balances will be much better. So I think we're all in a world where we're being forced to accept new technology. I mean, hell, I've had to learn how to use Instagram. I nearly died, but I've managed to figure it out. But you know, I think that people who are interested in evolving, as we all should be, are going to have to think about what's coming, because what's coming will challenge us professionally. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and because what's the normal? I mean, of course, the cost of production of a standard shoe is a couple of $2 to $3, is it, depending which country it's made in?
Depends on your definition of production. So we talk about the FOB, the free on board. So usually, give or take, around $20 for a shoe. So $20 Australian for a shoe that would retail for $280 to $300. That's typical.
Yeah, and so yeah, but of course that'll be. I'm sure that cost will be different then with a bespoke sort of shoe that would be designed like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, not. It's interesting. Not really. I mean, I could actually, right now for you, if I could gather your data, I could build you, like I'm talking today, I could build you a shoe that was almost completely bespoke from an anatomical last of your foot, and have it back to you in about 10 days, and it would probably cost you about 40 quid more than a normal one. Okay.
Yeah. So
this is not science fiction at all. This is, to a large degree, this is with us right now, and it's coming very fast.
Yeah. just thinking about the Back to the Future hover shoes or whatever they were. Quite that far in technology, and and of course, well, I mean, you've also got to look at sort of footwear in terms of sort of fashion and street fashion. I mean, you're sort of talking high level and things. I mean, this will sort of like all sort of trickle down. I mean, I mentioned before, it's like one of the guys I used to work with, Dave, the sports massage therapist, a keen triathlete again, but had, wondered why when he was standing on the starting line in one of his triathlons that he had one of those ribbed swimsuits on. It cost about, I can't remember, 200 or 300 quid, but then he realized he had it underneath his wetsuit. So people like all the sort of the toys and technology, but whether that actually sort of use them or not. And but that was
the funny thing is that in the industry we call this diverted use. So Salomon's marquee shoes called Speed Cross, and I think we're now up to Speed Cross 6, I think. And more than 50% of all Speed Crosses that are sold are not used for trail running. And in the UK, the vast majority of them are used to wear to the pub.
Mm-hmm.
True story.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of highly technical product does actually end up being worn as a fashion product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and then there's been the whole sort of, talking to Bob Kidd, or no, talking to Cameron Kippett. I mean, all
you don't want to be doing that. The
on the server with all the stuff. I mean, the most of the hits on there are all about footwear and music and fashion. I mean,
you just have a look at at what Nike and Adidas have done with in the last 20 years with their basketball product, particularly in the collaborations that they've developed. I mean, it's now it's just a completely separate industry. And you talk to somebody like Jim Weber, who's a very interesting guy. He's the president and CEO of Brooks Running, and he'll look you straight in the eye and say, running's not a real sport. That it's and what he means by that is, of course, it is a sport, but he's saying it's so individual, and there are so many nuances to it, and so many arms to where it can go, that it doesn't behave in a traditional manner. Like a tennis shoe is a tennis shoe, but a running shoe isn't necessarily a running shoe because it can be used in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and mechanically, with Hart Dannenberg's sagittal plane, it just made so much more sense, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, by far the most important biomechanical deficit for any athlete is limited ankle joint dorsiflexion range of motion. I mean, it just has such a knock-on effect everywhere. Mm-hmm. I think for me, it's by far the most important thing I look for in athletes. And dynamically, it affects them so profoundly. So that's, I think, the sagittal plane compensations are super important.
Yeah, and then back to not knocking the orthopedic colleagues again, but I mean, obviously knee problems, hip problems, low back, all the rest of the systems that stacked on top of that. Do you think there's a lot, even though there's all sorts of talk of all this research, and we talked about fitting widgets earlier on, if issues. Well, are they missing a sort of trick that they're only sort of treating them?
I think this is one of this folds back into the the exercise prescription discussion, and I think now there's really compelling evidence to say that so back in the day you just go, you had a sauna, you'd be in theatre having it scoped in the blink of an eye. I think now that sort of behaviour has really been reined in, and people are saying, listen, there's really compelling evidence for things like medial compartment, knee OA, certainly for patellofemoral pain, for the really big benefit of prescribed exercise for those sorts of conditions. Mm-hmm. And so I think there has been a general introspection from orthopedic surgeons as to what they should or should not be doing. Mm-hmm. Two of my oldest and best mates are orthopedic surgeons, so we have these discussions all the time, and it's quite interesting talking to them that they are actually a bit shocked at how much surgery is going on, and they think they feel that it's a bit more than should be happening. But I think this is, again, you don't point the finger at a profession, because if we were to say, they're doing too much surgery, they would, with great justification, be able to come back and say, you guys are prescribing too many orthoses, which we are. So, we have to be careful, and it's not about vilifying a profession. It's about saying, well, there are some new concepts, and I think the orthopedic surgeons do deserve credit, because they are actually doing less surgery, and they say, yeah, it probably is worthwhile going down the exercise path first, and if that fails, well, then surgery is always an option, and that's the same with lots and lots of different conditions.
Yeah, there are. I mean, your orthopods, yeah, they want to do everything but surgery now. But of course, then there's insurance companies and large private medical and scanners to pay for and things, and
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Again, a whole conversation for another time. But yeah, no, it just seems that whether that sort of whole holistic type of with all the research and all the information that we have, that, as you say, ankle joint, I always find that with the it's going to change the whole sort of function on a very innocuous injury at a quite an early stage in your teens can have a whole sort of knock-on effect of things right the way through until your needs replaced in when you're I had mine done last year.
Yeah. Look, I just think the ankle is the ankle joint, particularly its range into dorsiflexion, is just so important, because without argument, the knock-on effect all the way up to the thoracic spine is quite profound. So, there's top up and bottom down compensation. So, and we could argue that subtalar joint pronation there is as well, but I think we're far less able to prove that. Whereas it's measurable. It's very easy to measure. When you look at ankle joint dorsiflexion, it has a change at the level of the knee, the hip, and certainly the spine. So that's why I think that we should not be trivializing that sort of biomechanical deficit. It's very important to identify and manage.
Yeah. And you think, I think, is practice driving the research, or is it the footwear companies and material companies that are driving the research then?
Oh, gee, that's a very interesting question.
Well, it's just, I mean, because we were talking with Doug Ritchie a few weeks ago in his excellent Pathomechanics book, and I didn't even realize there's so much more dorsiflexion in the mid-tarsal joint as well. That he's concerned about there's a more of a push in the States for just surgery, and I didn't realize it was so. I mean, I was sort of thought that the States were trailblazers in terms of mechanics, that everyone wants to go to surgery. And again, not knocking. I mean, surgeries like hypocure coming across it.
There's a very interesting thread on podiatry arena at the moment that Kevin Kirby. No, it's not a podiatry arena. It's on Facebook, and it was one of Kevin Kirby's posts, and basically it shocked me, because one of the things we've tried to do with Bartold Clinical is we've tried to get American podiatrists interested in this. We've had great traction in the UK. We've had great traction in Europe and here in Australia, New Zealand, blah, blah, blah. But we haven't been able to get massive traction in the USA. And reading this thread, it was very interesting that Kevin's just saying, I've written all these chapters for books. I've done my intricate precision newsletters. I've lectured all over the world. And I'm basically done trying to convince American podiatrists that they should be focusing on biomechanics, because they are simply not interested. They just want to cut. And the young guys are coming out, all they want to do is surgery. They could not care less about biomechanics. And it's and I sort of had this light bulb moment. I thought, okay, well, that makes sense to me, that what we're offering is not attractive, because we're not at all surgically oriented. We're talking about MSK injury and biomechanics and athletic footwear and other things.
Yeah.
All these guys want to know about is how to perform the next type of surgery. So I think it is an issue in the USA, and I think guys like Doug and Kevin Kirby, Bruce Williams, some of these guys, they're really voices alone in the wilderness, and they really are struggling to make any headway. The schools are not interested.
Well, I mean, but I know Doug would sort of say that, I mean, somebody shouldn't be even allowed to operate on, unless they understand the whole
Yeah,
sort of pathologies behind things.
yeah. I think it's. I mean, Kevin's basically washed his hands of the US and said, if I can't make my voice heard in the USA, then I'm just going to continue working with podiatrists in Ireland, UK, Spain, France, Italy, emerging places where I've lectured with Howard actually in Spain, and you got a number of PhD podiatrists there whose main area is biomechanics and sophisticated stuff. I mean, these are guys who are doing really, really good work in the area of foot and lower limb biomechanics. And I'm talking hardcore biomechanics, like applied clinical biomechanics, not so-called podiatric biomechanics. They're really doing some key stuff. So these are sophisticated markets now, and the USA is just getting left behind. USA podiatry is going to be foot and ankle surgery. That's what it's going to be.
And then I suppose many physical therapists then are taking on the ban. And do you have more uptake from physical therapists or physiotherapists in the States?
Well, we do. I think the thing with physio is that they're just getting bombarded with opportunities for online education. I mean, one of the things that shocked me reading this thread in Kevin's Facebook page was that they were saying that in the USA, a lot of podiatrists in the USA are referring their orthotic work, their biomechanics work, out to prosthetists and orthotists. I have no issue with prosthetists or orthotists, but I just think that's really strange, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit of a strange thing to do. So I think they're feeling that underqualified to be dealing with biomechanical foot and ankle issues, that they're sending it to a totally different profession. And I think that's extraordinary. I think that's really, really unusual.
Yes, it's but as you said, the focus just seems to be, I just want to do surgery. But again, Doug was sort of saying that it's a lot of the surgery that they end up doing, a lot of limb salvage, a lot of diabetic stuff, and a lot of minor sort of procedures. And of course, it's well, of course, it'll still evolve and change. So
there's a lot to be said, Justin, for all rounders, I reckon. I think I got a couple of mates here who are. I mean, Trevor Pryor is a good example. I mean, Trevor Pryor is a very accomplished sports medicine practitioner, and he's also an accomplished surgeon. So he's got a very good skill set. I've never been interested in surgery. I didn't want to get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning with somebody saying, "How come my toes turned blue?" Never interested in me. So, I never. And I had a real passion to try to be as good at as I could in sports medicine. But I do think that there's a real case for people to sort of be all rounders, and that seems like, I mean, Kevin Kirby's an all rounder. He does surgery, but it seems like in the US at least that people just they just want to focus on one thing.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the great thing about podiatry, and that's what a lot of these interviews have been about. Is there's so much variety and so much that we can do within the profession, but it is just you just got to sort of keep on sort of pushing. And but I definitely think that definitely, some part of a multidisciplinary team, or even if you're just, because a lot of clinics tend to be quite isolated. So making those relationships with the local physio and the local sports medicine guys are definitely a way for moving.
It's really interesting to me. One of the things that's puzzled me for many years now is that we have a lot of experts in the clinic, in the profession, and we do have some real experts in the profession, but we don't seem to have too many. I can only think really of one experts in the area of rheumatology. Now, why is that? I mean, I don't understand that at all. I mean, Jim Woodburn is a real expert in that area, obviously. But
Jim was a student teacher when I was at London.
I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. I mean, there's just this absolute association between huge foot morbidity with rheumatology, and it just seems to me that we don't. It just seems to be like a massive opportunity for young podiatrists to say, I'm going to really upskill in this area, and I'm going I am going to become an expert in this area, and it just seems like a gap in the market. So if anybody's listening and anybody's interested, get out there and become an expert in rheumatology, because I reckon there's a real opportunity there.
Yeah, well, like we all did, everybody wants to work with sort of high-level athletes and on Olympic plans, and we're lucky enough to be able to do that. But I mean, it's I mean, those guys are so I don't know. I find them difficult. There's so many different factors. Those guys. I mean, you know, you're dealing with coaches, and you're dealing with everything, and you're dealing with sponsors. And
yeah, I think the thing that would appeal to me if I was studying again about rheumatology is that it's very medically oriented. So, you know, I do like that thought that you really would have to get immersed in understanding the medical aspects of the condition and the prescribing aspects of the condition and all that goes with it. And I do think it's quite similar in a lot of ways to sports medicine, in that there is a team in rheumatology, as there is in diabetic care. And I do like that concept. So yeah, I reckon there's something there.
Rheumatology, that would be the way to go. Maybe that will be the next one, the next venture. Great. So Simon, thank you very much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
I'm sure we could go on and talk about, as you say, the athletic stuff. But we're so yeah, interesting times ahead. So people can contact you through Bartold Clinical.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if anybody's got any questions at all, there's you just contact me through info@bartoldclinical.com. There's tons of open access stuff on the website too, guys. So if anybody wants to get in and have a look around, you don't necessarily have to pay the exorbitant amount of $16 US per month to join. By the way, that's 52 cents a day.
It's fantastic. And I mean, the amount of sort of research and articles and they're there. Plus, also you developed. Dave Buchanan said he quite enjoyed that. Well, you know.
Thanks, Dave.
Dave.
We're going to work harder here, Justin. He said quite enjoyed it.
Quite.
We'd be hoping for really enjoyed it. But,
I did ask people if they wanted to send in sort of questions and stuff, and nobody sort of stuck their head up. But what are we talking about? Yeah,
we were talking about.
Oh yeah, you've expanded your. You know, it's not just you now that have to listen to in Bartold Clinical. You have other experts there. Other guys.
We do, and we're developing them all the time. So I'm very aware that people are sick of the sound of my voice. So we've got some other real experts involved as contributors. So and we'll expand that. So it should be good.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
hold on there. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We'll speak to you soon. All the best. Bye bye.
Thanks very much, everybody. Ciao.